Hey everybody, welcome to ECH Kraken News. I'm Dylan. I'm here with RJ, and RJ, why don't you tell us what happened this week?
All right, Kraken news this week. Interesting article came out from Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic, and it talks about how Ron Francis and the Kraken are already a major player in this year's trade deadline. For those wondering, how can that work? The Kraken don't have any players; they can't even acquire players yet. Well, teams who are looking to acquire a player this year at the deadline are calling Ron Francis and asking him, okay, if I trade for this guy, what's it going to take for me to keep him in the expansion draft? And the example LeBron uses is Matthias Ekholm. So if you're acquiring Ekholm, you're probably giving up a first round pick and a prospect and maybe another piece to do so. And you're not going to want to lose him in the expansion draft after a few months if you go and acquire him for that much. But what if you already have three defensemen that you need to protect, and Ekholm would have to be exposed? You got to call Ron Francis up and say, hey, if I trade for Ekholm, how much do I have to give you so that you don't take him in July? And he's fielding these phone calls, and there is precedent for this. Fleury to Vegas, that's the big precedent. There was a deal in place at the deadline, as we have since learned. We didn't know it at the time, but at the trade deadline in 2017, Vegas made a deal with the Penguins that Fleury was going to be the expansion draft pick, and they were going to throw a second round pick their way to get them to do it. So Francis, he might already have a deal in his pocket, that we don't know about, but he's already fielding these calls, and he's been a very active part of the trade deadline. And the other thing LeBron reports is that the price that Francis is giving them is a first round pick, a prospect, and another piece, which gives you kind of an idea of the incredible leverage that Francis has in these negotiations. And he's going to continue to have all the way up to the expansion draft. And I think it's good that he's setting the price high, because ultimately I think teams are going to pay it. It may not be now at the deadline, but certainly come expansion draft time, GMs are going to freak out over losing certain players. So to me, this is an encouraging sign for the Kraken. I think for a while it seemed like, this isn't going to be like Vegas in 2017. GMs are going to be more rational and level-headed. They're not going to overthink it, and pay these exorbitant prices to keep their fourth defenseman or their eighth forward. But to me, at least, it's looking more and more like they're going to do that again, which of course would be great for the Kraken.
Yeah, I still have some doubts as to how many teams are actually going to be in that situation. I mean, we look at the landscape around the NHL right now, and there's really only a handful of teams that are in danger of losing a really big prominent piece. So, I don't think this is like a league wide thing. A lot of GMs are really that concerned about, but I do think there are a couple key things. There are a lot of teams where, yeah, they're going to have to protect, seven forwards and only 3D, and that could create problems for them, especially if they were to trade for an Ekholm. He's kind of been the piece all along that we knew was going to be involved in all of this. Um, I think, yes, I agree. Obviously, he should set the asking price high, right? He holds the leverage in the negotiation. I think the asking price is too high. Like, I'm not sure anyone will actually pay it just right off the bat. I'm sure it'll get negotiated down. We saw that with Vegas, right? For the most part, Vegas, they were just taking first round picks. They weren't really taking prospects alongside of it, or any high other picks alongside them. But Vegas, they did. They ended up with three first round picks in that opening draft. Now they used them to various degrees of success, but the bottom line is they came in. They had three first round picks. They had a handful of second round picks. Like that's a good way to start your franchise off. And I think that's even more important for the Kraken, considering the expansion rules in general are less favorable to the Kraken than they were for Vegas. The Kraken most likely will not end up with as good a team as the Vegas Golden Knights had coming out of the gate. So I think Ron Francis's ability to, acquire as many picks as possible so that he can start building their prospect pool, and start trying to find some of those, superstar caliber guys, first line caliber guys, top D pairing kind of guys that they're not going to be available to him in the expansion draft. So you got to build from within, and this is the way that they're going to be able to do that.
Right. Now, do you think that this really high asking price is one of the reasons we haven't seen so many trades yet going into the deadline, that maybe these GMs are kind of balking at, well, if I have to give up a first and a prospect and something else for Ekholm, and then give up, maybe another first or
Mm-hmm.
something equivalent to that to keep him, do you think that might be causing some trade gridlock so far, and it might continue up to the deadline?
Yeah, I mean it has to, just by the nature of the fact that you're now having to deal with essentially a third team involved, right? The fact that there are three people involved in these negotiations automatically means it's going to take longer to get any sort of deal done, because there's three interested parties in it. I think, especially when you're talking about difference making guys at the deadline here, like an Ekholm, potentially a Taylor Hall, or someone like that, as far as the names that have been floated around. Yeah, I mean, no one wants to give up a lot to acquire a player to help their run this year, just to then have to give up even more, potentially double the asking price for that same player, right? Like I would argue virtually no one is worth that, right? Because odds are, if you're getting, let's say you got, Eichel or something from the Sabres, you're having to give up so much for him to begin with that, there's no way you'd want to give up more to keep him. Obviously, you would automatically protect him and you'd sacrifice
But you dump
someone
the other guy
else.
down.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think that's definitely holding up a lot of what's happening. I don't know if it has necessarily as much to do with Ron Francis's specific asking price so much as it's just the nature of having three
The
parties
general threat
involved.
there, knowing
Yeah,
that, yeah.
yeah. Um, but I'm still kind of surprised we haven't seen more moves done, and part of that is I think there's a lot of teams that, yeah, they're afraid to move because they don't know what's going on with the expansion draft. I think there are still some teams, particularly the small market ones, that are afraid to take on too much extra salary right now, coming out of the COVID, lack of funds that the NHL has had as a whole. I think that's partly why you're not seeing some of the rentals go, because in years past, right, you want to get a rental, a guy who's only got the next couple months left on his contract, because not only are you getting him for your run this year, you're getting that window to talk to him about an extension that no other team has. And I think teams are still uncertain as to what free agency is going to look like. They're uncertain about their plans, given that we know the cap is going to be staying flat for a while. The league has said potentially up to 4 years. So I just think that there's a lot of things that are going into why we're seeing such a slow deadline. But yeah, I definitely think the Kraken are playing a big part in that.
Right. So, next bit of Kraken news. As part of that trade deadline story, Pierre LeBrun also reported that, and I'm quoting here, the expectation is that Seattle's $650 million expansion fee payment process will be closed by late April, which LeBrun adds is just a little bit later than Vegas did 4 years ago. So we might think, okay, great, late April, what's the hurry? But it might be putting the Kraken at a competitive disadvantage. So for those who don't know, the Kraken aren't an official franchise, officially a member of the league yet. Once that last payment closes and they're all paid up, then they officially enter the league and they can make player transactions and sign free agents and all that stuff that teams do. Now, they're of course not playing any games until October, but it is college free agent season right now, and teams have been signing these college free agents away. Josh Doon, Mike Hardman, Jordan Kawaguchi, some of the guys who have been signed so far. And the Kraken are missing out. Because this payment hasn't processed, they're kind of forced to sit on the sidelines while these players get signed. And I know finances are tricky, and certainly more so during a pandemic, but this is something to monitor because it does mean the Kraken are missing out right now. And I'm curious about your opinion on this, Dylan. How much of a disadvantage do you think this is? Do these college free agents usually become helpful players? And is this year's class something special? How much are the Kraken missing out here?
Yeah, I mean, the Kraken are missing out because, as we talked about in the last segment, a large part of the Kraken's like key to future success is building out their prospect pool, and this is one of the key ways teams do that. Because keep in mind, right now it's the NCAA college hockey free agent season, but right after that, given the crazy schedule that the CHL has, you're going to have the overaged major junior free agents available too. And if the Kraken aren't in a position where they can start signing those guys, that's a whole other pool of players that they're not going to have access to that the rest of the league will. Generally speaking, you don't find superstars in these kinds of situations, right? Anybody who's shown that kind of ability has been drafted long beforehand. College is unique in the sense that if a player is drafted and they do not sign after a couple years, their rights do expire to the team that had drafted them, so they do become a free agent, and so sometimes you can find pretty good players that way. I haven't watched too much of the NCAA stuff this year because again, all the schedules have been kind of off and different, and I've been busy. But I haven't heard of anybody that's really supposed to be like a big time difference maker. And like I said, even still in years past, you think of a Jimmy Vesey or something, right? He was supposed to be like this outstanding guy. You had all these teams bidding millions of dollars
Right,
for
all
him,
the hype around him.
right? And now he's kind of barely
On
hanging.
waivers.
Yeah, he's on waivers. He's barely hanging on to a spot in the NHL. So it's always hard to tell. It's in general you have a better feel of who guys are the older they are, just because you've kind of seen a little bit more. You know how their body's going to mature. At 18, you're still largely looking at their frame and trying to figure out how much they might fill out, how that might affect them moving forward, as far as their speed, their endurance, that kind of stuff. When you're dealing with a 20-year-old, some of those questions have been answered, or at least you have a better idea of what to expect. But the bottom line is it's a disadvantage for the Kraken, because if there is someone that Ron Francis likes, he can't get him, right? Some other team is going to get them, and that's all there is to it. Vegas wasn't really in this situation. You wrote a great article about that a little while ago on the website, about how Vegas started signing players early, and that's how they kind of kicked things off. And not only was it that they were adding to their prospect pool, because like that first player they signed, he never made the roster or anything, but it gave them a lot of promotional material and a lot of avenues as far as helping market the team. Because one of the things we've talked about is, until we see players in jerseys, until we start having names that we can talk about and start rooting for and attaching ourselves to, it's a lot harder to be excited, and it's a lot harder to start building that emotion with the Kraken while it's still just nameless, faceless logo. you know
Right, absolutely. And that's something that I think the Kraken could especially benefit from, given the fact they haven't been able to really go out into the community as much as they would have liked.
mm-hmm.
Having a player there, even if it's a college free agent signing who might not make the roster ever, would still go a long way.
Yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully that payment goes through sooner rather than later, and then they can be involved in this stuff. Is that it, Kraken news wise?
Yep, that's it for Kraken news this week.
All right. So thanks everybody for joining us. Make sure to like this video, leave a comment, let us know your thoughts about the situation. Are you worried about them, kind of being late to the party as far as signing some of these free agents? Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future things, and check back next week for more Kraken news.